Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The barrel of the gun pressed against Julian's temple wasn't cold. It was fever-warm, retaining the heat of a weapon that had recently been fired, and the smell of cordite was so sharp it tasted like copper on his tongue. "Look at me when I'm killing you, boy," the enforcer snarled, his voice a jagged grater against Julian's sensitive ears. But Julian didn't look. He couldn't. His gaze was fixed on the mahogany floorboards, specifically on the way the blood from his father's corpse was seeping into the wood grain, following the path of least resistance in a jagged, asymmetrical line that violated the perfect geometry of the room. It was maddening. It was wrong. If he could just move his hand, he could wipe the spill into a perfect circle, but the zip ties cutting into his wrists were too tight, humming with the tension of the plastic. "Leave him," a voice commanded from the shadows, a voice deeper than the thunder rattling the window panes, smooth like velvet dragged over gravel. "He isn't shaking." The gun pulled back. Julian didn't exhale. He simply continued to count the seconds between the lightning flash and the thunder roll. *1, 2, 3, *. Most men scream when they watch their father die. The voice continued. Leather shoes stepped into the light. Handmade. Italian. No scuffs. The man wearing them was a towering monolith of black fabric and sharp angles. Cashin, the Reaper Vane. The capo of the city's most ruthless syndicate. "But you're counting. What are you counting, little bird?" Julian finally looked up. He didn't see a monster. He saw a man whose tie was knotted in a perfect Windsor, whose breathing was controlled, a living statue of absolute order amidst the chaos of the slaughter. 7 seconds, Julian whispered, his voice cracking from disuse. The lightning struck the transformer down the street. The backup generator for the elevator takes 10 seconds to engage. If your men are coming up via the lift, they are currently trapped between the 3rd and 4th floors. But if the rival family cut the line, the elevator isn't stuck. It's falling. A heavy, metallic crash echoed from the elevator's shaft down the hall, followed by screams. Cashin stared at him. The room went silent, save for the rain. The Mafia Don tilted his head, his predator's eyes narrowing not with suspicion, but with a sudden, terrifying intrigue. "You heard the transformer blow over the sound of a gunshot?" Cashin asked, stepping over the corpse of Julian's father as if it were nothing more than a discarded coat. "I hear everything," Julian murmured, flinching as the thunder finally boomed. "It's too loud. The world is too loud." Cashin signaled his guards. "Cut him loose. And get him a noise-canceling headset. I want to see what else he can hear." The transition from the blood-soaked penthouse of his late father to the obsidian fortress of Cashin Vane was a blur of sensory nightmares. Julian remembered the texture of the leather seats in the SUV, too grainy, and the smell of the driver's cologne, pine, and stale tobacco. He had curled into a ball in the back seat, rocking rhythmically, trying to reset the chaotic data flooding his brain. His father, a low-level gambler who had tried to sell Julian to a human trafficking ring to pay off a debt, was dead. Julian felt no grief, only a strange hollowness where the obligation to a parent should have been. Society called him broken. His father had called him a burden, a retard, a waste of space who couldn't make eye contact, but could memorize the serial numbers on a dollar bill at a glance. Now, he sat in the center of a room that was larger than his entire childhood apartment. The walls were glass, overlooking the rain-slicked city. The furniture was minimalist, stark, and terrifyingly expensive. Julian sat on the edge of a gray sofa, his hands flapping slightly at his sides, a stemming behavior he usually tried to suppress, but his defenses were shattered. The door opened. Julian froze. Cashin entered. He had shed his suit jacket, rolling the sleeves of his white dress shirt up to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and inked with tattoos that vanished under the fabric. He held a glass of water and a small bottle of pills. "Hydrate," Cashin ordered, holding the glass out. Julian stared at the water. "There's a smudge on the rim." Cashin paused, looked at the glass, saw the microscopic fingerprint, and frowned. He didn't scoff. He didn't tell Julian to stop being difficult. He simply walked to the wet bar, poured the water into a fresh, pristine crystal tumbler, and returned. "Better." Julian nodded and took the glass with trembling hands. Why am I here? My father owed you 2 million. I have no money. I have no social skills. I cannot be sold for pleasure. I panic when people touch me. Cashin sat on the coffee table opposite him, bringing himself to Julian's eye level. For a man known for flaying his enemies alive, his posture was surprisingly unthreatening. Your father tried to sell you to the Albanians, Cashin said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in Julian's chest. He told them you were slow, that you were docile cattle. Julian looked at his knees. He wasn't wrong. About the slow part. The doctors said. The doctors are idiots, Cashin interrupted, sharp but not unkind. And your father was a fool who couldn't see a diamond because it was covered in mud. You predicted the elevator failure. You calculated the timing of the surge. That isn't slow, Julian. That is a gift. It's a curse, Julian whispered. I see patterns. I hear electricity in the walls. I can't filter it out. It hurts. Then I will build you a world where it is quiet, Cashin said, the promise hanging in the air with the weight of a blood oath. In exchange, you will lend me your eyes. My organization is bleeding money. Someone is stealing from me, and my accountants, men with degrees from Harvard and Yale, can't find the leak. I think you can. Julian blinked. You want me to look at spreadsheets? I want you to hunt, Cashin corrected, a dark smirk curling his lips. I want you to find the pattern that doesn't belong. 3 weeks later, Julian was no longer the shivering boy in the bloodstained apartment. He was something else. A ghost in the machine of the Vane Syndicate. Cashin had kept his word. He had given Julian a wing of the mansion that was soundproofed. He had replaced the buzzing fluorescent lights with soft, warm LEDs. He had fired the chef who refused to cut the crusts off Julian's toast and hired one who viewed Julian's dietary restrictions as a sacred law. For the first time in 24 years, Julian wasn't fighting the world. He was safe. And because he was safe, his mind sharpened. He sat in Cashin's office, surrounded by towers of paper ledgers. The syndicate had gone analog to avoid cyber surveillance, but the paper trail was a labyrinth designed to confuse. Cashin sat at his desk, cleaning a disassembled Beretta. The rhythmic click-clack of metal parts was a consistent, soothing sound that Julian had grown to associate with safety. Page 412, Julian said, not looking up from the ledger. Cashin paused. What about it? The shipping manifest for the imports from Macau. The weight distribution is off by 0.04% compared to the fuel consumption of the transport trucks. Cashin stood up, walking over to stand behind Julian's chair. He didn't touch him. He learned early on that Julian flinched at unexpected contact, but his presence was a warm wall of protection. Explain. If the crates contained electronics as listed, the trucks would be lighter. The fuel consumption suggests a heavier load. Denser. Like gold. Or lead. Julian traced the column of numbers with a slender finger. And on the return trip, the weight is lighter than the registered empty containers. Someone is swapping the containers. They aren't smuggling goods in for you, Cashin. They are using your logistics network to smuggle your own weapons out to sell to your rivals. Cashin leaned over, his breath ghosting the shell of Julian's ear. Who signed off on the manifest? Marco, Julian whispered. You're second in command. The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. Cashin straightened up, his face hardening into the mask of the Reaper. Marco was his brother-in-arms. They had grown up on the streets together. Are you sure? Cashin asked. Julian finally turned to look at him. His eyes, usually darting and anxious, were steady. The numbers don't lie, Cashin. People lie. Emotions lie. But the math is pure. Marco is stealing from you. Cashin stared at him for a long moment, the silence stretching taut. Then, he reached out, hesitating before resting his hand gently on the back of Julian's chair, avoiding his skin. Good boy, Cashin murmured. The praise sent a jolt of electricity through Julian's spine that had nothing to do with sensory overload and everything to do with the way Cashin's dark eyes were devouring him. The confrontation happened 2 days later at one of the syndicate's underground clubs. Cashin had brought Julian along. It was a risk, but Cashin had claimed he needed Julian to verify the cash counts in the vault in real time. In reality, Julian suspected Cashin just didn't want to leave him alone at the mansion. The club was closed to the public, but the bass from the sound system still thumped in the walls. Julian wore the noise-canceling headphones Cashin had bought him, sleek, black, and expensive. He sat in the corner of the VIP booth, clutching a tablet, watching the room. Marco walked in, flanked by 2 guards. He was a handsome man, but his smile was too wide, his eyes too shiny. A predator in a cheap suit. "Boss," Marco greeted, spreading his arms. "You called for a sit-down? Everything okay?" Cashin remained seated, swirling a glass of whiskey. "Sit, Marco. We need to talk about Macau." Marco's smile didn't falter, but Julian saw the microscopic twitch in his left eyelid. "Attell. Macau is booming, boss. Profits are up 10%. Profits are down," Cashin corrected softly. "By exactly $4 million over the last quarter." Marco laughed, a nervous, barking sound. He glanced at Julian in the corner. "Did the retard tell you that? Come on. Cass, you're letting the pet do the accounting now?" He probably can't count to 10 without drooling. The room went deadly silent. Julian shrank into himself. He was used to the words. Asterisk retard. Idiot. Broken. Asterisk they were the soundtrack of his life. He adjusted his headphones, trying to drown out the sudden spike in his heart rate. Cashin set his whiskey glass down. He didn't slam it. The sound of the glass touching the marble table was delicate, almost gentle. "What did you call him?" Cashin asked. "I'm just saying." Marco sneered, emboldened by his own arrogance. "He's a liability. A freak. Everyone says so. You keep him around like a mascot, but he's autistic, Cass. He's not a man. He's a broken toy." Cashin moved so fast that Julian barely registered the blur. One moment Cashin was sitting. The next, he had Marco pinned against the wall, his hand wrapped around Marco's throat, lifting him off the ground. The guards moved to intervene, but Cashin's other hand flashed out, drawing his gun and leveling it at them without looking. "Don't," Cashin warned the guards. His focus remained entirely on Marco, whose face was turning purple. "You steal from me," Cashin hissed, his voice a low growl that bypassed the headphones and vibrated in Julian's bones. "You betray me. That, I might have forgiven. I might have just exiled you. But you insult him." Cashin tightened his grip. "You look at him and see a disability," Cashin snarled. "I look at him and see the only person in this city who has never lied to me. He is worth 10 of you. He is worth everything." Cashin threw Marco to the floor. The traitor gasped for air, clutching his throat. "Get him out of my sight," Cashin ordered the guards. "Take him to the basement. I'll deal with him later." As Marco was dragged away, kicking and screaming, Cashin turned to Julian. The rage fell from his face instantly, replaced by concern. He walked over and knelt before Julian, ignoring the stunned silence of the other men in the room. Cashin gently pulled the headphones away from Julian's ears. "Did he scare you?" Julian shook his head slowly. "No. You defended me. Always," Cashin vowed, reaching out to tuck a stray lock of hair behind Julian's ear. His fingers brushed Julian's cheek, rough skin against soft. This time, Julian didn't flinch. He leaned into the touch. "You aren't broken, Julian. The world is just too small to understand you." The peace didn't last. Marco had friends. Powerful friends in the rival Salvadiera family. The attack came a week later, during a gala at the Museum of Modern Art. It was a neutral ground event, a masquerade ball where the city's elite mingled with its criminals. Cashin had insisted Julian attend. He had commissioned a suit made of silk so fine it felt like water, ensuring no seams would irritate Julian's skin. Julian stood by the buffet table, organizing the hors d'oeuvres by color, while Cashin spoke with the senator. The atmosphere shifted. Julian felt it before he saw it. The rhythm of the crowd changed. The chatter spiked in pitch. The air conditioning vents rattled with a sudden change in pressure. Someone had opened the fire exits. "Cashin," Julian whispered into the comms piece in his ear. "I'm here." Cashin's voice came back instantly. 3 men. 9 o'clock, 12 o'clock, and by the stairs. They aren't drinking. They're checking their watches. Synchronized. I see them. Wait. Julian's eyes darted around the room. He looked at the shadows, the angles of the balcony, the lighting rig. The shadows are wrong. There's someone up there. It's a sniper. Get down. Cashin roared. The first shot shattered the ice sculpture next to Julian. Chaos erupted. Screams tore through the hall as the masquerade turned into a slaughterhouse. Julian dropped to the floor, covering his ears. The noise was physical pain, white-hot needles stabbing into his brain. The gunfire, the The screaming, the shattering glass. It was a sensory overload so severe his vision began to tunnel. Asterisk 1, 2, 3. Asterisk he tried to count, but the numbers scrambled. A hand grabbed his arm. Rough. Violent. Found the little freak. It was one of Marco's loyalists. He yanked Julian up, jamming a pistol into his ribs. Cashin, drop it, or the boy dies. Across the room, Cashin froze. He was behind a marble pillar, dual pistols drawn, his suit jacket ruined. His eyes locked onto Julian's. There was fear there, raw, unadulterated fear that Julian had never seen on the Reaper's face. Let him go, Cashin shouted over the din. Drop the guns, the gunman screamed, tightening his grip on Julian. The smell of the man's sweat was overpowering. Julian squeezed his eyes shut. He couldn't breathe. The sensory input was shutting down his motor functions. But through the haze, he heard something. A pattern. Asterisk click. Whir. Click. Asterisk. The HVAC system above them. The gunman was standing directly under the heavy crystal chandelier. The sniper on the balcony had moved, shifting his weight. The vibrations in the floor told Julian that two of Cashin's men were flanking left. Julian opened his eyes. He looked at Cashin. He didn't speak, but he tapped his fingers against his chest. Asterisk 3, 2, 1, asterisk. Cashin understood. He didn't question how Julian knew. He just trusted. On one, Julian went dead weight, dropping to his knees. The gunman, taken by surprise, stumbled forward. In that split second, Cashin fired. Not at the gunman, but at the chain holding the massive chandelier above them. The bullet severed the link. The crystal monstrosity plummeted. The gunman looked up too late. The chandelier crashed down, crushing him instantly. The force of the impact knocked Julian backward, shielding him from the worst of the shrapnel. Those shards of crystal sliced his cheek. Gunfire erupted again as Cashin broke cover, sprinting across the open floor. He moved like a demon, shooting the sniper on the balcony without even breaking stride. He slid to his knees beside Julian, holstering his weapons and scooping Julian into his arms. I've got you, Cashin panted, pulling Julian's face into his chest to hide him from the carnage. I've got you. Don't look. Just listen to my heart. Julian pressed his ear against the blood-soaked shirt. Asterisk, thump thump. Thump thump, asterisk a perfect, steady rhythm. Even in war, Cashin was his anchor. I counted. Julian sobbed, the adrenaline finally crashing into tears. I counted the seconds. I know. Cashin kissed the top of his head, rocking him amidst the ruin of the Gala. You saved us. You saved me. The aftermath was a quiet sort of violence. The Salvati-era family was dismantled systematically over the next 48 hours. Cashin left the mansion often, returning with bruised knuckles and cold eyes. But the moment he crossed the threshold into Julian's wing, the monster stayed at the door. Julian lay in bed, tracing the bandages on his arms. The doctors had come and gone. The cuts were superficial, but the shock had been deep. The door creaked open. Cashin stood there, looking exhausted. He wore loose sweatpants and a t-shirt, stripped of his armor. Can I come in? He asked. He always asked now. Julian patted the space beside him. Cashin sat down. The mattress dipped under his weight. He looked at Julian with an intensity that made the air feel thin. They wanted to hurt you to break me, Cashin said quietly. They didn't realize that you were stronger than I am. I'm not strong, Julian whispered. I just notice things. You notice the world in a way no one else does. You see the truth. Cashin reached out, taking Julian's hand. He turned it over, pressing a kiss to the pulse point of his wrist. For years, I walked through this city thinking I was a king. But I was blind. Until you. Julian's heart hammered a staccato rhythm against his ribs. What happens now? The threat is gone. You don't need a human lie detector anymore. Cashin's grip tightened. Is that what you think this is? A transaction? That's how the world works. Value for value. Not with us. Cashin leaned in, his dark eyes searching Julian's face. The world called you disabled because they were too stupid to understand your language. I'm learning it, Julian. Every day, I'm learning. I don't want you for your math. I don't want you for your patterns. Then what do you want? I want the silence, Cashin whispered, leaning his forehead against Julian's. When I am with you, the noise of the life I lead, the blood, the screams, the politics, it all stops. You are my quiet place. You are my sanctuary. Julian felt the tears prick his eyes again. For a boy who had been told he was too much, too loud, too wrong, to be told he was someone's piece was the most overwhelming sensation of all. I love you, Cashin said. It wasn't a question. It was a fact, stated with the same absolute certainty as a mathematical equation. Julian looked at the man who had killed for him, who had reshaped his entire life to accommodate his needs, who treated his neurodivergence not as a defect, but as a different kind of perfection. The probability of this working is low, Julian murmured, falling back on his logic as a shield. Mafia dawned. Me. Fuck probability. Cashin growled softly, closing the distance to press his lips against Julian's. The kiss was slow, careful, and devoid of the sensory chaos Julian feared. It was firm pressure, warm and grounding. It tasted like mint and whiskey. It wasn't overwhelming, it was just right. It fit the pattern. Julian closed his eyes, his hands coming up to grip Cashin's shirt. For the first time in his life, he didn't count the seconds. He just let them exist. And that is how the viper tamed the wolf. If you enjoyed seeing Julian find his voice and Cashin burn the world down to protect him, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a partner who kept you in a golden cage if it was the only way to keep you safe? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then,